Chapter 4. The City Has Teeth. The silver plains lay stretched wide beneath the rising dawn, the long grasses turning gold in the slant of early light. Their camp was quiet but for the small crackle of embers and the soft shuffle of Renlyn's movements. He sat stiffly near the fire, quill and parchment tucked close to his side, though his eyes wandered again and again toward the pair across the clearing. Izzi stirred first, stretching like a cat in her bedroll, hair a tangle of silver and shadow, her shirt loose around one shoulder. Kaelen was already awake, bare-chested, tightening the straps on his greaves as if it were the most natural thing in the world to lounge about half-dressed. Renlyn swallowed hard, though by now the sight no longer sent him reeling with embarrassment. He was adjusting, slowly. Still, he found his gaze dragged more often than not to Izzi, the image of her laughter with the woman in green still etched into his mind from the night before. Izzi caught him watching and arched a brow, smirking. "Morning, scribe. You look like you didn't sleep at all." Renlyn stammered, fumbling for words. I slept fine, I assure you. Only, you seem in good spirits." His cheeks burned at his own clumsiness. Izzi leaned back on her elbows, her grin softening into something less teasing, more thoughtful. "I've had worse nights." She let the words hang, not offering the details she usually would. For once, she didn't feel the need to brag about her score. Renlyn nodded, and with uncharacteristic boldness said, "I'm just glad you're happy." The simplicity of it struck her harder than she expected. She tilted her head, studying him, suddenly aware that beneath all the nerves and stuttering there was a quiet steadiness in him. It caught her off guard. For a heartbeat too long, she said nothing, then finally shrugged it off with a playful smirk, though her eyes lingered on him in a way they hadn't before. Meanwhile, Kaelen had slipped into the tree line earlier, hunting for something more substantial than dried rations. The woods carried their own hush, cool with morning mist, but as he moved between the pines he caught a scent, familiar, unmistakable. Celine. She was close, watching. He froze, hand instinctively tightening around the hilt of his blade, but the air brought no threat, just a presence. She was keeping distance, ensuring the trail was being followed. Kaelen's tusked jaw tightened all the same. When he returned to camp, his face was grim, though he carried a brace of rabbits in one hand. Izzi cocked a brow at him, but his expression silenced her quip before it formed. "Company waits for us in Veylmar," he said slowly, eyes cutting toward her. "She's close, too close." Izzi's smirk faltered, her earlier ease giving way to alertness. The day, it seemed, was already shifting. The camp stirred to life slowly with the pale blue of dawn creeping across the silver plains. Smoke from the fire drifted lazily, carrying the faint smell of Kaelen's cooked rabbit. Bedrolls were folded, straps tightened, and the hush of morning still clung to everything. Renlyn had spoken only once since they'd risen, quietly, almost too softly, when Izzi stretched and let out a content sigh. "I'm just glad you're happy." He had said it without fanfare, his face pink, as if embarrassed the words slipped out at all. Now, hours later, those words clung to Izzi like morning dew. Happy. It was such a small thing, but no one had ever said it before, not without wanting something in return. No one but Kaelen, who had always been the rock she leaned on, the one constant since exile. Her exile. The words still burned, even after decades. Those first lonely years, wandering with no one to call friend, no warmth at her side, only sharpened edges and survival. She had taught herself not to crave endearment. It was always fleeting, always conditional. Yet now, with the scribe's awkward kindness, there was a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. It was such a fragile, fleeting thing. In all her years wandering the continent since exile, happiness had been a trickster that danced just out of reach. Not until Kaelen, who had been there when she was at her worst. And now this awkward, bookish scribe, tripping over his own tongue, had said it like it mattered. She tied her cloak in silence, lost in the hum of memory. Her first years alone, raw with bitterness, drowning in nights colder than steel. It had made her sharp, walled off. But now she caught herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, Renlyn's company didn't feel like an intrusion. It felt different. It felt warm. "You're quiet." Kaelen's voice cut through her reverie. He was cinching a strap on his pack, eyes narrowing at her with mock suspicion. "When you go this long without running your mouth, I start to think you're planning something awful." Izzi smirked faintly. Oh, trust me, if I were planning something awful, you'd already be complaining. Kaelen barked a laugh. There she is. I was worried I'd woken up with the wrong elf. Izzi smirked and tossed her braid over her shoulder. You wish you could wake up beside me? Ha. Kaelen rolled his eyes, adjusting the strap on his pack. Not in this life. She grinned at his dismissal, but something about his easy, unbothered tone made the air between them feel lighter again. They sparred in words like they always did, blades of wit and familiarity clashing, but the fire of it didn't linger in Izzi this time. She drifted again, pulled under by thoughts she didn't care to voice. Izzi? The voice broke her trance. Renlyn stood a few paces away, pack clutched in both hands, his dark eyes uncertain but kind. He had spoken her name gently, as if afraid it might shatter something fragile. She blinked, caught off guard by how the sound of her name in his mouth softened her mood, made the walls she always held feel strangely thinner. The road stretched long beneath their boots, winding through hamlets, markets, and quiet farming towns that blurred together as days passed. Each stop offered a chance to rest, to gather supplies, to let Renlyn try his hand at talking to people, though that rarely ended well. The scribe would stammer and sweat through introductions, his words tangling together in knots that left villagers blinking politely, unsure of what he'd been trying to say. More than once, a simple inquiry about directions to Veylmar ended with Renlyn backed into a corner, apologizing profusely for asking. That was when Izzi would swoop in. Don't mind him, she'd say with a radiant grin, slipping an arm around his shoulders and tugging him forward as though he were merely shy rather than a fumbling disaster. We've been traveling long and his tongue hasn't quite caught up with his head. Then she'd tilt her head, smile sharper now, and coax answers out of whoever stood before them with a mixture of laughter, charm, and soft touches on sleeves or wrists. By the end, merchants would be smiling, guards chuckling, and innkeepers offering a discount. Renlyn tried to take notes, literally, scratching tiny reminders in his journal, but Izzi had other ideas. No, no, she scolded, snatching the quill out of his hand one evening as they camped. You don't write your way into people's good graces, you breathe it. Relax your shoulders, hold their gaze but soften it. Smile, even if your stomach's twisting. She leaned in closer, brushing against him deliberately to make him flush. Like this. Renlyn, crimson to his ears, muttered something about indecency under his breath, which only made Izzi laugh louder. Kaelen, meanwhile, was harder to ignore. In smaller villages, people stared at his towering frame, the tusks curling from his jaw, the scar ridged across his cheek. The closer they drew to Veylmar, the more whispers followed in their wake. Children clutched their mothers' skirts. Shopkeepers shifted uneasily when Kaelen approached to haggle. Even when he smiled, or tried to, it made little difference. Fear lingered like a shadow. At first, Kaelen only sighed, buying their food and moving on. But after the third town, Izzi caught him brooding by the fire. You'd think they'd never seen an orc before, he muttered. Always the same. The first thing in their eyes is a calculation. How quickly could I break them in half? Izzi nudged him with her boot. At least they're not wrong. He snorted, but the edge in his gaze softened. Renlyn, watching the exchange quietly, scribbled another line in his notes. This time, though, he wasn't recording runes or local dialects. He was studying them. As the last of the roadside chatter faded and their fire burned low, Kaelen sat back against a log, arms crossed, his tusked profile cut in harsh lines by the firelight. He had been brooding for some time, but finally the words slipped free. I hate cities, he said. Izzi, stretched out on her cloak with one leg lazily draped over the other, cracked open a curious eye. That so? Thought you just hated everything? Kaelen huffed through his nose but didn't take the bait. Cities. They're sheltered. Soft places, hidden behind their walls. They don't know the storms, or the beasts, or the hunger beyond them. And when they see me... He jerked his chin toward his own broad shoulders, his tusks catching the glow of the flames. All they see is an orc. Something rare. Something dangerous. Not a man, not a companion, just a shadow to bar their gates. Izzi pushed herself up on her elbows, studying him in the fire's glow. Her expression was softer than her words. And what do you care what they see? You've got tusks, Kaelen. They make you look terrifying in a good way. Intimidating's useful. He gave a low grunt, eyes still fixed on the fire. Doesn't mean I don't feel their eyes. Doesn't mean I like being a monster to them. Izzi tilted her head, lips quirking into a small grin. You're not a monster. Not to me. Kaelen finally glanced at her, then quickly away. You don't count. Of course I count, she said with a laugh, leaning back again. I've shared bedrolls and breakfast with you. I've seen you at your worst, which is saying something, by the way. And still, you're my Kaelen. That tugged a rare smile from him, though fleeting. Renlyn, scribbling notes a little ways off, had been quiet through the exchange, but his eyes flicked between them, catching pieces of the weight behind Kaelen's words. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing, letting the crackle of the fire fill the silence. For Izzi, though, Kaelen's confession lingered. Cities had always been her playgrounds, places where charm and wit opened doors. But now she looked at her companion differently, imagining him hemmed in by cold walls and fearful stares, and for the first time, she felt a pang of guilt at dragging him toward Veylmar. Izzi leaned forward, eyes fixed on Kaelen across the fire. You know what I think? He raised a brow but said nothing, waiting. I think those city folk ought to be the ones worried. They've never seen half the things you've lived through, never survived storms or beasts or even me. She smirked, but her voice softened at the edges. You're the strong one, Kaelen. Their walls are nothing compared to what you've carried. For a moment, Kaelen's jaw worked as if he were about to argue, but the words died before they left him. Instead, he gave a slow exhale, his gaze lowering to the fire. Izzi's eyes lingered on him, kind and certain, before she leaned back and let the silence rest. By the next afternoon, the three were back on the road. Villages dotted the green edges of the silver plains, their markets noisy with hawkers, smells of bread and smoke drifting on the breeze. Renlyn, eager but clumsy, tried striking up conversations with a few traders. He fumbled over greetings, overcompensated with stiff politeness, and left more than one villager staring after him in confusion. Izzi, arms crossed, leaned casually against a post until she couldn't take it anymore. She strode over, slid herself between Renlyn and the villager, and smiled in that easy, lilting way that disarmed anyone. Forgive my friend here, she said, her voice smooth as honey. He's still learning the ways of the road. But what he really means to say is... She turned her head just enough to flash Renlyn a wink, then coaxed him forward. Go on, try again. With charm this time. Renlyn swallowed hard, adjusted his posture the way Izzi had shown him, shoulders relaxed, chin lifted, and tried again. This time his voice carried differently, not timid but steady. He even managed a faint, genuine smile. The villagers' eyes softened. They chuckled, then nodded, and by the end of the exchange, Renlyn had secured both information and a fair deal without Izzi having to rescue him. Izzi blinked, her grin widening in surprise. Well, look at that, she murmured, giving him a playful tap on the arm. The boy can charm after all. Maybe I should be worried about competition. Renlyn flushed but stood a little taller than before, his confidence quietly budding. Kaelen, a few steps back, watched them. He caught the way Izzi's smile lingered just a little longer than usual, her eyes narrowing in approval. For once, she wasn't mocking, she was impressed. And that, he thought grimly, could be dangerous. The camps outside Veylmar bustled with the sounds of settling caravans. Wagon wheels creaked to a halt, hammers drove stakes into the earth, and smoke from countless fires laced the dusk air. Izzi, Kaelen, and Renlyn had staked out a modest patch of ground near the tree line, choosing the open air over a crowded inn. Renlyn sat by the fire, trying to make sense of the growing press of humanity, and failing. His ink-stained fingers twitched with the urge to write down the sheer noise and chaos, but his thoughts scattered when a ripple of silence seemed to move through their little clearing. She emerged like a shadow given flesh. Celine. Kaelen's hand slid to the hilt of his sword before she'd taken 3 steps. The air between them grew taut, like a bowstring drawn back. Izzi, however, only laid her fingers on the dagger at her belt and said evenly, "It's fine." Renlyn swallowed, stunned. The woman moved with the same poise as a cat that already knew it owned the hunt. He couldn't look away. Celine's smirk widened as she came close enough for the firelight to paint her features in warm gold. She leaned in, her lips near Izzi's ear, her voice a silken whisper that slid like a blade between ribs. "Little rabbit?" Izzi's expression didn't crack, save for the smallest twitch at the corner of her mouth. She tilted her head just enough to whisper back, low and sharp. "I'm gonna enjoy taking the artifact of Kaelen from you." For a heartbeat, Celine faltered, her practiced smirk cracking just enough to show the sting. She masked it quickly, straightening with a slow, languid roll of her shoulders, but the flush in her cheeks betrayed her. As she turned to leave, she tossed her words over her shoulder like a blade casually flicked. "Just wanted to remind you that the city holds more than coin and comfort. It has teeth. Best keep yours bared." And then she was gone, as sudden as she had appeared. Renlyn sat frozen, his mind struggling to catch up, while Kaelen let out a slow, deliberate exhale, as though resisting the urge to chase her down. Izzi only poured herself a drink, muttering under her breath, "Gods, she's exhausting." The air seemed to settle heavier once Celine vanished, like her presence had bent it in some unseen way. Renlyn shifted, clearing his throat, too loud in the silence. His curiosity, though usually smothered by his shyness, won out. "So, that was Celine?" His voice cracked, not quite steady, eyes darting between Izzi and Kaelen. Izzi's jaw tightened. She didn't even glance at him, instead fussing with her satchel. No one important. Her words came clipped, sharp as a blade put away too fast. She brushed a hand through her hair, already half-turned toward the row of makeshift stalls where merchants still sold their wares. "I need more wine." And before Renlyn could press, she strode off, shoulders stiff, annoyance flashing in every movement. Kaelen watched her go, his brow low, tusks just visible as he exhaled through his nose. He leaned back against a cartwheel, motioning for Renlyn to sit. For once, the orc's usual bluntness was tempered with something heavier. "You want to know who exactly Celine is?" Renlyn nodded hesitantly, still staring in the direction Izzi had gone. Kaelen scratched at his jaw, then spoke low, like sharing a story best kept to shadows. "She was a friend once. A lover too for a time. Accomplice, more often than not. The two of them made a name for themselves in places you wouldn't want to hear about." His eyes narrowed, distant. "But Celine. She always had a taste for cruelty, not the playful kind Izzi toys with. Real cruelty. Sadistic. When she shows it, and trust me, she will. It's terrifying." Renlyn swallowed, the words lodging in his throat. Kaelen tilted his head, his gaze fixed on the faint glow of the city's walls in the distance. "So take this as a warning. If Celine's circling us again, it won't be for pleasantries. And you," he glanced sidelong at Renlyn, "keep your heart out of it. Izzi can handle herself. But Celine's a storm you don't want to be caught in. She seems to know everything about that one." The scribe lowered his eyes, quill fingers flexing against his thigh. He thought of Izzi's laughter, the warmth she showed him when no one else did. Then of Celine's smirk, sharp and knowing. A pit settled in his stomach, though he said nothing. The night outside the city walls thickened around them, as if even the stars were wary of what prowled in its streets. Izzi's boots sank into the loose soil as she cut away from the bustling camp toward the merchant tents, her thoughts a storm louder than the clamor around her. Celine's whisper lingered in her ear like smoke that wouldn't clear. She hated that it still had power. There had been a time when Celine's touch had been fire on her skin, sharp and intoxicating. Nights spent entwined in tangled sheets, their bodies slick with sweat and laughter, testing limits with a hunger Izzi had once mistaken for freedom. Celine had made her feel desired, alive, reckless. She remembered the way Celine's nails would rake down her back, the sting and pleasure blurring until she couldn't tell which she craved more. But just as vividly, she remembered the night it all broke, and remembering something from earlier. Happiness not without something in return. The betrayal hadn't come in a single strike but in a careful arrangement. Whispers to the wrong ears, deals made behind Izzi's back. A mission that had seemed theirs alone until it crumbled into ambush. The job had been lost, their target slipped away. But worse had been the truth revealed after. And the look on her face when Izzi realized it, mocking, almost tender, was burned into her memory. "You're too soft," Celine had told her. It had gutted Izzi, not the loss of the mark, not the close call with death, but the realization that what she thought was love had been a game. She had walked away that night, heart cracking like glass, refusing to give Celine the satisfaction of seeing her shatter. Still, the ache lingered, and when Celine whispered in her ear tonight, the ache flared again. Anger, shame, and a flicker of longing Izzi despised herself for. She stopped at a stall, slapped down coin for a bottle, and pulled it open, swallowing deep. The burn steadied her hands but not her heart. By the time Izzi turned back toward camp, she had convinced herself of one thing. She would never let Celine see her bleed again. The campfire cracked and spit sparks into the night, shadows licking up the sides of tents and wagons gathered near the city gates. Izzi sat apart from the noise, her wine flask half empty at her side, her usual easy smirk dulled. For once, her eyes weren't roaming for amusement. They were far away, fixed on ghosts she couldn't shake. She exhaled sharply, then turned toward Renlyn, who sat hunched over his parchment by the fire's glow. "Hey, scribe," she said, tone lighter than she felt. "Remind me again what it was you needed to do here in the city. Distract me." Renlyn blinked, startled by the sudden weight of her attention. He shuffled the parchment, holding it carefully like a priest might a holy script. "Ah, yes. The task my master set me on." His voice steadied as he read. "Where the water remembers the moon, there the passage waits unseen." At those words, Kaelen's head lifted, sharp as a wolf catching scent. Slowly, the orc smirked. "That old riddle again. I remember it from the start of this cursed road. Didn't think much of it then." His eyes flicked toward Izzi. She frowned, pulling from her pocket the small runes she'd carried since their first night together. Turning it over in her palm, she held it up so the firelight caught the faintly glowing script. The exact words Renlyn had spoken shimmered there, carved into the stone like veins of silver. Renlyn's breath caught. "Moon and water. Yes," Izzi muttered, gaze fixed on the rune. "Pick them up near Avaren." Kaelen's smirk died into a growl. That's why she showed herself tonight. Not for you, or the boy. Though she'll take her jabs. She came sniffing for these. Izzi squeezed the runes tight in her hand, jaw clenched. Of course she did. She always did know where to dig for weakness. Renlyn leaned forward, eyes bright despite himself, but this proves it, doesn't it? The parchment and the runes, two halves of the same clue. Together they point the way. If the riddle speaks true, then we might actually find it. Kaelen leaned back, arms folding across his chest, tusks catching the glow. The city holds more than coin and comfort, she said. Aye, it has teeth, and now we know what they're biting for. He let his grin return, sharp and dangerous. But we've got teeth of our own. Izzi looked from one man to the other, then down at her closed fist, the runes still warm against her skin. For once, she had no quip. Just the faintest spark of unease, and the reluctant acknowledgement that Celine's shadow was closer than ever. The fire settled into a low glow, embers pulsing like a heartbeat. Izzi's hand tightened around the runes, the silver veins etched into them catching the faintest flicker of light. She stared at it, jaw set, and for once her silence felt heavy rather than playful. Renlyn, who had been watching her from across the flames, hesitated. His mouth opened, then closed again, then opened once more. Finally, he found his voice. I'm glad it was you, he said, softly but steady. Izzi's eyes flicked up, her brow furrowing. What? The runes, Renlyn explained, a faint flush creeping up his cheeks. That they ended up with you. Anyone else might have sold it, or ignored it, or worse. But you've carried them all this time, without really knowing why. That means something. For a long beat, Izzi just stared at him. No smirk, no teasing line ready on her tongue. She felt the compliment settle in her chest like warm wine, unexpected and disarming. You think too highly of me, scribe, she murmured, though her voice lacked its usual edge. No, Renlyn said, surprising even himself with the firmness in his tone. I don't think it's possible to. Izzi blinked, caught completely off guard. A slow grin threatened at the corner of her mouth, but it wasn't her usual sharp blade of a smile. This one was softer, reluctant, almost vulnerable. She turned back to the rune in her hand, unable to look at him any longer. Across the fire, Kaelen's eyes flicked between the two of them, his tusked grin fading into something quieter. He said nothing, only leaned back and let the firelight cast his face into shadow. The night pressed in, close and heavy, but the silence that followed was not the uncomfortable kind. It was something else, something new, something growing.
Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe. More chapters are on the way.